Hey guys, so for this video I'm going to be talking about Azir, the Empire of the Sands. Um, Riot has decided that with the release of Talia that they are going to redo the lores for the characters that are related to Shurima. I think it's kind of interesting that they had Ascension earlier. They did save it for the week that Talia comes out because it would make most sense because Azir, Renekton, um, Zeroth, and Nasus are all the ascended characters. So since they're doing the um, Shurima and stuff, I would think that they would save it for then. But that's just my thoughts. So we'll go ahead and read um, Azir's lore. So we'll start there. So, Azir, the Emperor of the Sands. Shurima was once the glory of Runeterra, and I will make it so again. Azir was the mortal emperor of Shurima in the far distant age, a proud man who stood at the cusp of immortality. His hubris saw him betrayed and murdered at the moment of his greatest triumph, but now, millennia later, he has been reborn as an ascended being of immense power. With his buried city risen from the sand, Azir seeks to restore Shurima to its former glory. Thousands of years ago, the Shuriman Empire was a sprawling realm of vassal states conquered by powerful enemies led by all but invincible warriors known as the Ascended. Ruled by an ambitious and power-hungry emperor, Shurima was the greatest realm of its day, a fertile land blessed by the power of the sun that shone from a great golden disk floating atop a temple in the heart of its capital. The youngest and least favored son of the emperor, Azir, was never destined for greatness. With so many siblings ahead of him, he would never be emperor. Most likely he would take a position in priesthood or as a governor of some backwater province. He was a slender, studious boy who spent more of his time pursuing the texts collected in the great library of Nasus than training to fight under the stern tutelage of the ascended hero Renekton. Amid the twisting shelves of the scrolls, books, and tablets, Azir met a young slave boy who visited the library almost every day in search of texts desired by his master. Slaves in Shurima were forbidden to take names, but the two boys became friends. Azir broke that law and called his new friend Zeroth, which means the one who shares. He appointed Zeroth, although he was careful never to endanger him by naming him publicly, as his personal slave, and the two boys shared their love of history by learning all they could of Shurima's past and its long legacy of ascended heroes. While traveling with his father, brothers, and Renekton on the yearly tour of the Empire, the royal caravan stopped at a well-known oasis for the night. Azir and Zeroth stole away in the middle of the night to draw the stars and add their own celestial maps to those that they had studied in the great library. While they drew the patterns of constellations, the royal caravan was attacked by a cabal of assassins sent by the emperor's enemies. One of the assassins found the two boys out in the desert and was poised to cut Azir's throat when Zeroth intervened, throwing himself upon the assassin's back. In the ensuing melee, Azir freed his dagger and plunged it into the attacker's throat. Azir took up the dead man's sword and rushed back to the oasis, but by the time he had returned, the assassins were already defeated. Renekton had protected the emperor and slain the attackers, but Azir's brothers were all dead. Azir told his father of Zeroth's courage and asked him to reward the slave boy, but his words fell on deaf ears. In the emperor's eyes, the boy was a slave and beneath his notice, but Azir swore that one day he and Zeroth would be brothers. The emperor returned to the capital within the 15th year, with the 15-year-old Azir, now his heir, and unleashed a merciless campaign of bloodshed against those he believed had sent the assassins. Shurima descended into years of paranoia and murder as the emperor took revenge on anyone he suspected of treason. Though he was now heir to the throne, Azir's life yet hung by a thread. His father hated him, wishing he had died with his instead of his brothers, and the queen was still young enough to bear sons. Azir, trained in combat for the attack at the oasis, had revealed how little he knew of deadly arts. Renekton took up the task of teaching the growing prince, and under his aegis Azir learned to wield the sword and spear, to command warriors, and to read the ebb and flow of battle. The young heir elevated Zeroth, his only trusted confidant, and made him his right-hand man. To better counsel him, Azir tasked Zeroth with seeking out knowledge wherever he could find it. Years passed, but the queen was never able to carry a child to term, every conceived infant perishing before it could be born. So long as the queen remained barren, Azir's life was relatively safe. Some around the court believed a curse was at work, and a few even whispered that the young heir's name in connection with this, though Azir claimed innocence and even executed some who dared such accusations openly. Eventually the queen bore a healthy son, but on the night of his birth a terrible storm engulfed Shurima. The queen's chambers were struck again and again by powerful bolts of lightning, and in the subsequent blaze both the queen and her newborn were killed. It was said that the emperor went mad with grief and took his own life upon hearing the news, but tales soon spread about how he and his guards were found lying in pieces on the palace floor, their bodies little more than charred skeletons. Azir was shocked by their deaths, but the empire needed a leader, and with Zeroth at his side, he took control of Shurima and its emperor. Over the next decade, he expanded Shurima's borders and ruled with a harsh but just hand. He instituted reforms to better the lives of slaves and privately developed a plan to overrun millennia of tradition and eventually free them all. But he kept his plans secret, even from Zeroth, and the issue of slavery would prove to be a conjugal bone of the connection between them. The empire had been built on the back of slavery, and many of the great noble houses depended on enforced labor for their vast wealth and power. Such as monolithic institutions could not be overturned overnight, and Azir's plan would be undone if they too became common knowledge. Despite Azir's desire to name Zeroth his brother, he could not do so until Shurima's slaves were free. Though through the years, Zeroth protected Azir from his political rivals and guided the expansion of the empire. Azir married and fathered numerous children, some by wedlock and some from ill-advised liaisons with slaves and harem girls. Zeroth stoked the emperor's grand vision of the empire, greater than the world had ever known. But to stand as ruler over the entire world, Zeroth convinced Azir that he would need to become invincible, a god amongst men, a decided beating. As the kingdom reached the zenith of its power, Azir announced that he would undertake the ascension ritual, that the time was right for him to take his place alongside Nasus and Renekton and their glorious forebears. Many questioned his decision. The ascension ritual was highly dangerous and intended only for those near the ends of their lives, those who had devoted their lives to Shurima and those whose service had been honored with ascension. It was for the sun priest to decree who would be blessed with ascension, not the hubris of an emperor to bestow it upon himself. Azir would not be dissuaded from the rash course of action, and his arrogance had grown along with his empire, and he ordered them to comply on the pain of death. The day of the ritual finally came, and Azir marched toward the dais of ascension, flanked by thousands of his warriors and tens of thousands of his subjects. The brothers Renekton and Nasus were absent, having been dispatched by Zeroth to deal with an emergent threat. But still Azir would not turn from what he saw was his great destiny. He climbed to the golden sun disk atop the temple, and at the heart of the city, in the moments before the sun priest began the ritual, he turned to Azirath and finally freed him, not just him, but all the slaves. Azirath was stunned speechless, but Azir was not yet done. He embraced Azir and named him as his eternal brother, and as he had promised he would do all those years ago. Azir turned to the priests and began the ritual to bring down the awesome power of the sun. Azir was unaware that Azirath had studied more than just history and philosophy on his quest for knowledge. He had learned the dark arts of sorcery, and all the while nursing the desire for freedom that had grown like a cancer into a burning hatred. At the height of the ritual, the former slave unleashed his powers, and Azir was blasted from his place on the dais. Without the protection of the runic circle, Azir was consumed by the sun's fire as Azir took his place. The light filled Azirath with power, and he roared as his immortal body began to transform. But the magic of the ritual was not intended for Azirath, and such awesomely powerful celestial energies could not be diverted without dire consequence. The power of the Ascension ritual exploded outward, devastating Shurima and laying waste to the city. Its people burned to ash, and the towering palaces fell to ruin as the desert sands rose up to swallow the city. The sun disk sank from the sky, and what had taken centuries to build was brought to ruin in an instant by one man's ambition and another's misplaced hate. All that remained of Azir's city were sunken ruins and echoes of its people's screams on the night winds. Azir saw none of this. For him all was nothingness. His last memories were pain and fire. He knew nothing of what befell him atop the temple, nor what became of his empire. He remained lost in timeless oblivion until thousands of years after Shurima's doom, the blood of his last descendant was spilled onto the temple ruins to resurrect him. Azir was reborn, but was yet incomplete. His body was little more than animate dust given form, held together by the sieges of his indomitable will. Gradually resuming his corporeal form, Azir stumbled through the ruins and came across the corpse of a woman with a treacherous knife wound in her neck. He did not know her, but saw in her features the distant echoes of his bloodline. All thoughts of empires and powers were forgotten, and he lifted his daughter of Shurima and bore her to what had once been the oasis of the dawn. The oasis was empty and dry, but with every step Azir took, the clear water began filling the rocky basin. Azir immersed the woman's body in the restorative waters of the oasis, and the blood washed away. Only a faint scar remained where the blade had pierced her. With that act of selflessness, Azir was lifted up into the column of fire as the magic of Shurima renewed him, remaking him as the ascended being that he was meant to become. The sun's immortal radiance poured into him, crafting his magnificent hawk-armored form and granting him the power of command to the very sand itself. Azir lifted his arms, and the ruined city shrugged off the dust of centuries spent beneath the desert to rise anew. The sun disk lifted into the sky once more, and the healing waters flowed between temples, heaving themselves back into the light at the Emperor's command. Azir climbed the steps of the newly risen Sun Temple, weaving the desert winds to recreate the city's last moments. Ghosts formed of sand revealed his city's last moments from long ago, and Azir watched in horror as Azir's treachery unfolded. He wept when he saw his family murdered, his entire empire fall, and his power stolen. Only now, millennia too late, did he finally realize the depths of hatred harbored by his former friend and ally. With the power and persistence of an ascendant being, Azir sent Sira somewhere abroad in the world, summoned by an army of sand warriors to march alongside the reborn emperor. As the sun blazed from the golden disk above him, Azir swore a mighty oath. "I will reclaim my lands, and I will take back what is mine." Arisen. Azir walked the gold-paved emperor's way. The immense status of Shurima's earliest rulers, his ancestors, watched his progress. The soft shadowy light of pre-dawn seeped through his city. The brightest stars still shone overhead, though they would soon be snuffed out by the rising sun. The night sky was not as Azir remembered it. The stars and constellations were misaligned. A millennia had passed. With every step, Azir's heavy staff of office struck a lonely note, echoing through the city's empty capital streets. When last he walked this path, an honor guard of 1,000 elite warriors had marched in his wake. The cheers of the crowd had shaken the cities, and it had been his moment of glory, yet it had been stolen from him. Now it was a city of ghosts. What had happened to his people? With an imperious gesture, Azir commanded the sands beside the roadway to rise, creating living statues. This was a vision of the past, the echoes that Shurima had given form. The sand figures looked forward, heads tilted toward the immense sun disk hanging on the dais of ascension, half a league ahead. It hung there still, declaring the glory and power of Azir's empire, though no one remained to see it. The daughter of Shurima who had awakened him, who bore his lineage, was gone. He sensed her out in the desert. Blood bound them together. As Azir walked the Emperor's way, the sand echoes of his people pointed up to the sun disk, their joyful expressions turning to horror. Mouths open wide in silent screams, they turned to run, stumbling and falling. Azir watched this all in despairing silence, bearing witness to what was the last moments of his people. They were obliterated by a wave of unseen energy, reduced to dust and cast into the winds. What had gone wrong with his ascension to unleash this catastrophe? Azir's focus narrowed, his march became more resolute, and he reached the base of the stairs of ascension and began to climb, taking them 5 at a time. Only his most trusted soldiers, the priesthood, and those of royal bloodline were allowed to step foot upon the stairs. Sand visions of these most favored subjects lined his path, faces upturned, grimacing and wailing in silence, as they too were swept away by the winds. He ran, taking the steps faster than any man could, talons digging into the stonework, carving furrows where they were caught. Sand figures rose and then were destroyed on either side of him as he climbed. He reached the top, and there he saw the final circle of onlookers, his closest aides, his advisors, his priests, and his family. Azir dropped to his knees. His family was before him, rendered in perfect heartbreaking detail, his wife heavy with child, his shy daughter clutching his wife's hand, his son standing tall on the brink of becoming a man. In horror, Azir saw their expressions change, though he knew what was to come. He could not look away. His daughter hid his face in the folds of his wife's dress, and his son reached for his sword, shouting in defiance. His wife, her eyes widened and widened, sorrow and despair wrought within. The unseen event blasted them to nothingness. It was too much, but no tears welled in Azir's eyes. His ascended form rendered that of a simple act of grief forever lost to him. With a heavy heart he pushed himself to his feet. The question remained as to how his bloodline survived, as it was most assuredly had. A final echo waited. He advanced, halting one step below the dais, and watched as it all played out before him, reenacted in the sand. He saw himself, in his mortal form, rise up into the air beneath the sun disk, arms wide and his back arched. He remembered this moment. The power coursed through him, infusing his being, filling him with divine strength. A newcomer formed in the sand, his trusted bondsman, the Magius Azir. His friend uttered a silent word, and Azir watched himself shatter like glass, exploding into motes of sand. "Zirath," breathed Azir. The traitor's expression was unknowledgeable, but Azir could see nothing but the face of a murderer. Where did such hate come from? Azir was never aware of it. The sand image of Zeroth rose higher into the air as the sun disk's energy focused into his being. And a crowd of elite guards rushed towards him, but they were far too late. The brutal shockwave of sand flared out, disintegrating the final moment of Shurima. Azir stood alone among the dying echoes of the past. This is what killed his people. Azir turned away as the first rays of a new dawn struck the sun disk overhead. He had seen enough. The sand image of the transformed Zeroth collapsed behind him. The dawn sun reflected blindly off Azir's flawless golden armor, and in that instant he knew the traitor still lived. He sensed the Magus' essence in the air that he breathed. Azir lifted a hand. An army of his elite warriors rose from the sands at the base of the stairs of ascension. Zeroth, he said, his voice tinged with rage, your crimes will not go unpunished. So that's the end of the new Azir lore. So it goes into some pretty good detail as to what happened, and it's pretty. The story is pretty sad as it kind of unfolds. It gets sad with Saphir and Cassiopeia opening up Zeroth's tomb and things like that, and the stuff with Renekton and Nasus going on too. And we'll get to that. So they only have Zeroth out, or Azir and Zeroth out right now. So I will be doing Zeroth and putting that up, and then I'm assuming they're going to release one a day until they have Talia put up. So I will put those up when they arrive, and then we'll go from there. If you have any suggestions as to who you want to see next, I have done Talia, and I've also done all of the characters that were related to Mount Targon, as well as Mount Targon itself. So if you have any interest in those, I will put the playlist up in an iCard, and then if you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe and comment as to what you want to see next, and I hope everybody has a nice night.